Clint Eastwood set the letter down on the desk, pushed back his chair, and walked off the Tonight Show stage, without saying a single word. Jimmy Fallon's mouth moved. Nothing came out. 300 people in that studio stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Whatever had just happened in that letter, whatever words a stranger had put on that page, had done something to one of the most unshakable men in American cinema that 50 years of Hollywood had never managed to do. It was a Thursday night taping, March 2023. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Clint Eastwood was the guest, 92 years old. A legend so complete, so carved into the stone of American culture that the audience had begun applauding before he even walked through the curtain. He was there to talk about a small documentary project. Nothing more. A quiet night. Routine enough. The kind of show that fills the calendar between the bigger bookings. He walked out slowly, not hurrying, the way men walk when they have decided long ago that the world can wait for them. The applause was immediate and enormous. He acknowledged it with a small nod, the kind that says thank you without performing gratitude. He sat down across from Jimmy, and the interview went beautifully. Dry humor. Crisp stories. The effortless authority of a man who had been doing this for 60 years and had never once needed the audience's approval to feel steady. Jimmy was at ease. The band was loose. Everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. And then, somewhere near the end of the interview, Jimmy reached under his desk and produced an envelope. Not a promotional item. Not a prop. Just an envelope. White, slightly worn at the corners. The kind of envelope that has been handled many times by someone who wasn't sure whether to send it. He set it on the desk between them. Not loud, not dramatic. Just an envelope. He told Clint that a man named Thomas Garrett had sent it to the show 3 weeks earlier, that the producers hadn't known what to do with it, that Jimmy had read it himself and decided some things belonged to the person they were written for. Clint Eastwood looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then, he picked it up, opened it slowly, unfolded a single page of handwritten words. His eyes moved across the lines. And then something happened to his face that the audience had never seen on a Clint Eastwood face before. Something went very still, something that looked, from 300 seats away, like a man recognizing something he had believed was gone. He folded the letter, set it on his knee, stood up and walked off the stage. Jimmy Fallon's mouth moved. Nothing came out. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1964. Clint Eastwood wasn't always Clint Eastwood, legend and institution. In the autumn of 1964, he was an actor between things. A face in the television Western rawhide, yes, but also a man staring into a gap. The show was winding down. The big parts hadn't arrived yet. The Sergio Leone films were shot but not yet released in America, and he was living in that uncertain space that every artist knows, the place between what you have done and what you are about to become, where nothing is guaranteed and everything feels suspended. He was in Carmel, California, a small coastal town he had always felt at home in, with its fog and its pine trees and its long, quiet beach. He was there in November of that year, working on nothing in particular, walking the beach in the early mornings the way men walk when their minds are loud and they need the ocean to be louder. He went to a diner most mornings, a small place near the water that opened at 6 and smelled like coffee and salt air. He sat in the same booth each time, facing the window, watching the light come up over Monterey Bay. That was where he met Henry Garrett. Henry was 11 years old. He came into the diner on a Saturday morning with his father, a commercial fisherman whose boat was moored 200 yards down the pier. The boy was small for his age, with dark eyes and the kind of stillness that unusual children sometimes have. Not shyness, exactly, but a quality of watchfulness, as if he was collecting information about the world before he decided what to do with it. He sat down in the booth next to Clint's. He looked over once. The way children look at adults they find interesting, direct, uncalculating. Then he pulled a paperback from his jacket pocket and started to read. It was a Western novel, one of the old ones. Clint noticed the cover. The boy noticed Clint noticing. Their eyes met. "You like those?" Clint asked. "I want to write them someday," Henry said. Not shyly, not hoping for approval. Just as a fact he had already decided about himself. They talked for an hour. Clint's coffee went cold, and he didn't notice. Henry talked about stories the way children talk about things they love, completely. Without self-consciousness, without performing the love, just living inside it. He talked about the structure of a Western, about the moral weight of landscape, about how the desert or the mountain range is never just backdrop, but always a character with its own intention. He was 11 years old, and he had thought about this more seriously than most adults Clint had ever met. Clint asked him what kind of stories he wanted to write. "Stories about men trying to be better than they are," Henry said. "That's the only kind worth telling." Clint Eastwood sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, I think you're right." Henry's father came to collect him. They shook hands, a man's handshake, offered and received without irony. Henry put the paperback back in his pocket and left. Clint watched them walk down toward the pier. He thought about what the boy had said. Stories about men trying to be better than they are. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about it, in fact, for the rest of his life. He never saw Henry Garrett again. Not because of falling out or loss or any cruelty. Just because the world moved the way the world moves. Within months, the Leone films hit America and everything changed overnight. The career exploded into something enormous. The years became decades. Carmel became home in a different way, later, as a place of choice rather than a place of waiting. And one morning at a diner became a memory he held the way you hold the things that shaped you quietly, without fanfare, without anyone else knowing why they mattered. He had thought of that boy many times over 60 years. The directness, the certainty, the moral seriousness in a child who should have been thinking about baseball. He had wondered sometimes what became of him, whether he had written those stories, whether the world had given him the space to become who he intended to be. He had never tried to find out. Their time had passed, and he had made peace with it, the way you make peace with the small encounters that change the direction of your thinking without ever knowing they did it. Henry Garrett grew up. He did write those stories. 11 novels over 40 years, published quietly, read by the kind of people who find books rather than books finding them. He taught high school English in Sacramento for 32 years. He raised a son named Thomas. In January of 2023, Henry Garrett was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. They told him 6 months, maybe 8. He spent February deciding what mattered. In early March, he sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter. He wrote it to Clint Eastwood, care of a production company he found online, with a second envelope addressed to The Tonight Show on the outside. Because he understood that old men with cancer didn't necessarily get their letters through, he wrote it in longhand, the way he had always written, because he believed handwriting was a form of honesty that typing didn't allow. He told Clint about the morning at the diner. He told him he wasn't sure Clint would remember it. He told him it didn't matter whether he did. He wrote, "I have spent 60 years trying to write what you said that morning was worth writing. I don't know if I succeeded. But I wanted you to know that a stranger's agreement, given plainly and without performance, was the permission I needed to keep trying when I had every reason to stop. You will never understand the weight of a casual kindness. That is the nature of casual kindness. But I am dying, and there are things that need to be said before they cannot be. He wrote, "You told an 11-year-old boy that he was right. That is a small thing. It is also everything." He sealed the letter. His son Thomas drove it to the post office. Behind the scenes, the Tonight Show producers had received the letter on a Tuesday. They had passed it among themselves uncertainly. Letters came to the show constantly. Most were handled by the correspondence department, acknowledged with a form response, filed away. This one was different. Someone had flagged it, passed it to someone else, and eventually it reached Jimmy. He read it twice. Then he called his producer. He said, "I want to give this to him on air. I want him to read it while we're rolling. I want him to have whatever that moment is with the cameras there." The producer asked if they should tell Clint in advance. Jimmy said no. He said, "Some things need to be received the way they were sent. Without preparation, without performance." The Tonight Show staff had no idea what was in the letter. They knew only that Jimmy had made a decision, and that the decision was final. Back on the stage now. Back in the present, the letter is folded on Clint Eastwood's knee. He has been gone from the set for 90 seconds. The audience has not made a sound. Jimmy Fallon is standing at his desk, not performing, not filling silence, just standing in the way that people stand when they understand that something real is happening and that the professional obligation to manage it is less important than simply bearing witness to it. Then Clint came back. He walked back through the curtain. He sat down. He placed the letter on the desk between them again. He looked at Jimmy for a moment, and Jimmy looked back, and neither of them said anything, because there was a kind of communication happening that did not need words. Then Clint said, quietly into his microphone, "There was a boy." He paused. "I remember him." Jimmy nodded. He said the only stories worth telling are stories about men trying to be better than they are. Clint's voice was steady but lower than it had been. "I've been making those movies for 60 years. I never told anyone where that came from. Silence. I don't know if he's still alive." Jimmy said, "Softly, I can find out." Clint shook his head slowly. He picked up the letter again, held it without reading it. "He knows I got it now," he said. "That's enough." He looked out at the audience, 300 people who had stopped breathing. He said that a stranger's agreement, given plainly, was the permission he needed to keep trying. His voice cracked then. Once, briefly, he held it. "I've been given a lot of awards. People have said a lot of things to me." He stopped. "I was just drinking coffee." Jimmy Fallon stood up from his desk. He walked around it. He sat down in the empty guest chair next to Clint, which no Tonight Show host does, which is not in any script, which happened because a human being needed to be closer to another human being, and no professional consideration was larger than that. He didn't say anything. He put his hand on Clint Eastwood's arm. Clint looked at it. Then he looked at Jimmy. Then he looked back out at the audience. "Thank you for giving this to me," he said. The audience did not applaud. They were quiet in the way that people are quiet when they understand that applause would be smaller than the moment. 300 strangers in a room that was built for entertainment, holding something that had nothing to do with entertainment at all. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone started to clap slowly. One pair of hands. Then another. Then the whole room, on its feet, not celebrating, not performing enthusiasm, just standing up because sitting felt wrong. Questlove sat still behind his drums. The cameras kept rolling. No one in the control room cut to commercial. Thomas Garrett, Henry's son, received a phone call from The Tonight Show 2 days after the episode aired. He was told that his father's letter had reached Clint Eastwood, that it had been read on air, that 60 million people had now heard his father's words. Thomas told a reporter later that his father watched the episode in his hospital bed, that he didn't say much about it afterward, that he folded his hands and looked at the ceiling for a long time and eventually said, "That's a good ending." Henry Garrett passed away 11 weeks later, in April of 2023, surrounded by his son and 2 former students who had driven 4 hours to be there. Clint Eastwood did not attend the funeral. He sent a handwritten note. Thomas keeps it on the same shelf as his father's 11 novels. The letter Henry wrote is now in a drawer in a house in Carmel, California, where it has been since March of 2023. Clint Eastwood has never spoken publicly about where he put it or why he put it there. He didn't need to. Some kindnesses travel 60 years to find the person who was always meant to receive them.